music review for you. This is the 1983 release of Hearts and Bones by Paul Simon. Now, this album was a bit of a commercial disaster for Paul, but it's probably his most personal to date, and ambitious and critically recognised as one of his best, focusing on his middle-aged challenges. And I must admit, the more I listen to it, the more I fall in love with it. But early days, back in those 80s, I listened to it and it passed me by, and I thought, well, that's really sort of MOR. But then, of course, my listening wasn't that good in those days, and it's far improved now, particularly doing reviews. It sharpens up your listening skills, and you hear a lot more of the good parts on these albums. So let's get on to the review track by track. Opening track, Allergies. It starts off with that Fender Rhodes piano, which is quite prominent throughout this album, and it's in tandem with Paul's vocal on the intro, establishing the melody and the chorus in a rather comedic style. Some cute little lead guitar as well, a picking style, finger picking style, and Al D'Amelio, the jazz guitar player, is credited with this. It's got a sort of Spanish flamenco style, and I really love it. The strings are added sparingly, and lyrically it's a bit of a metaphor for love and its effect on the mind and body, allergies. A great opener. Second track is the title track. It's a lyrical love affair about travelling to Mexico. Nice soft percussion and acoustic guitar chord leads us into this romantic story of the beauty of travelling. The deftness of the guitar is one of the fine moments on this album, and that's linked with nice synths and keyboards, and it really sounds very pure. The song again is about relationships, the fact that they end up fading inevitably to failure, and this theme about relationships, middle age, looking back, is a theme that's repeated on the record. To track 3 then, and When Numbers Get Serious, there's some nice guitar on this, lead guitar by Eric Gale, a skippy rhythm with some neat bass starts off, and then the track changes pace a little later, and the chorus harmonies again slide into a slow ballad outro, which is really polished, and I just love those harmonies, but they're very laid back in the mix. Track 4 is Think Too Much. It's like a reprise really of the track Maybe I Think Too Much, which is on side 2. A strange positioning of the track order, I felt. It's poignant and it has an air of serenity. Lyrics poignant, speculating on how relationships go wrong. It's another little beauty. Final track on side 1 then, Song About the Mood. A real lazy sort of mood, smoochy style is created. It's a very slow sort of ballady, and I love that soft Fender piano again. It's not overstated, and it's a nice sort of closer for side 1. Side 2 opens up with the skippy beat of Maybe I Think Too Much. The drums lock you in early on, and Paul's lead vocals simply sublime. Simple rhythms and almost a snug-like feel, and it's really sort of doo-wop style pop, and I get a feel that that's got something to do with the producer, who is Neil Rogers. You may remember him from Chic and from David Bowie's Let's Dance. So quite a lot of influence from him, I think. And then we could get on to track 7, and this is one of the standouts. Train in the Distance. It's storytelling at its best. We all know that Simon has a knack for telling great stories, and this one mixes love, marriage, family, and parting. The title is a sort of metaphor for magical feelings and the memory of them. When we look back at past relationships, we always tend to romanticize those memories and generally forget about all the bad bits. The hooks, the oohs and ahs, really breathe life into this track, and you also sense that African feel on those harmonies, and also there's a neat alto sax solo that takes us through to the outro. It's definitely a highlight on this album. But the next track's pretty good as well. Renee Georgette Magret with The Dog After the War. I made a point of finding out a little bit about the lyrics on this one, and it's a pictorial collage, really, frozen in time. It's about a surrealist painter who grew up, was active in the at the time of the Second World War, and Simon was inspired by two photographs he came across of the painter Rene and his wife in the two time periods, and he decided to write a song about it. It's an interesting sort of take on it. It also gives a nod to the doo-wop groups of the 50s. There's a reference to Christopher Street in Manhattan, where the painter was holed up for a period, and it's also implies a hungry desire in the early lyric for some bit of passion in the hotel room. I really enjoyed it. It's another highlight, really. It's a slower pace, and there's some lovely orchestration towards the latter part of this song, which enhances the mood and the intimacy. Track 9 then, Cars and Cars. Jerky pop contrast, really. Nile Rodgers on guitar, and you can see his influence. A bit of tongue-in-cheek in the lyrics. It's a bit quirky. Not one of my favourites, I have to say. And then we get to the last track, the late great Johnny Ace. Again, I did my homework on this one, and the title refers to a early rhythm and blues star who, in 1954, when he was becoming quite famous, decided to play a dangerous game and ended up shooting himself in the head, courtesy of Russian roulette. And anyone familiar with the Deer Hunter will know exactly what that is. And it was an image that stayed with a very young Simon as being the first tragedy in sort of rock and roll. And the song goes on to describe other heroes of Simon's, including the great John Lennon, and he references the Beatles and the tragic murder of Lennon. Musically it starts off without a rhythm, but the storytelling begins. But after a minute or so, the rhythm starts, and Simon relates the story, and we also get reference to the death of JFK, and there's some absolutely delightful flute, cello, clarinet and violin at the end, which the last minute is actually credited to being composed by Philip Glass, and it really does round off the track beautifully. So What have we got there? Well, I think it's an album that will grow on you. Hearts and Bones expands Simon's repertoire from the earlier jazz pop fusion to doo-wop and a dabble at English African rhythms, and we know where that all ended up with the later release of Graceland. For new listeners to Paul Simon, I would suggest you take your time, listen to it repeatedly. It took me nearly 20 years to fall in love with this album, but it's now at the top of 83's best of list. So enjoy it. Heart of Bones, 1983 by Paul Simon.